Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are back with the second classical game in the match between two famous content creators, the international master Levy Rozman and the international master Julien Song. Now, yesterday's game was a very topsy-turvy first game of classical chess, which ultimately ended in a draw. There were missed opportunities for both sides, but nonetheless, let's see how the players react. So we have the second and final classical game. The players are playing with 90 minutes plus 30-second increment, and we have Julien Song from France with the white pieces. So we get the move d4. Levy plays d5, we get c4, and now Levy decides to play the move d takes c4. Now, Levy, since his return to chess, or I should say since the pandemic, has played a lot of these systems. He's played the Queen's Gambit accepted, these Queen's Gambit declines, all kind of things like a6. I think he's even played h6 here, amongst other things. So Levy is very comfortable in these queen pawn openings with pawn to queen 4, pawn to queen 5. So Levy decides to play the Queen's Gambit accepted today by taking the pawn, and now we get the move knight f3. Now, I actually was playing this opening quite a bit in recent times in the Global Chess League in India. If black plays the Queen's Gambit accepted, generally the most testing continuation is considered to be the move pawn to e4, which is what Ali Reza Firouzja played against me when he beat me in the Global Chess League. But Julien Song is a player that is known as more of a positional player. He likes simpler positions, tries to win long, grindy games. So he decides to play the other main setup with the move pawn to e3, eschewing the classic big white center. So we get the move e3. Levy plays move bishop g4, and this is a system that is considered to be dubious in modern chess practice. Now, while the system is considered dubious, as you're about to see, unless you know exactly how to punish the setup that Levy plays, it's relatively stable and you play for a clear-cut plan. Normally, black plays move e6, followed by c5, castles, and something like a6, or bishop e7, or a knight c6, amongst other options. But in this game, Levy goes bishop g4, so we get bishop takes pawn, pawn to e6, castles, and Levy plays the move bishop d6. We get the move h3, bishop to h5, knight to c3, and now Levy plays the move knight to c6. Now, when I talk about simple plans, which is something that I really expanded upon in yesterday's recap video, or the second take of it, I should say, is that when you play these openings, what Levy's idea here to do is he simply wants to castle the king, play something like queen to e7, and play this move pawn to e5, or maybe rook to d8, followed by the move e5. And black tries to open up the center of the board. You have the rook on the open, on soon to be open d file. You have the bishops on great diagonals, and you play for one concrete idea. So I really like this general approach from Levy, because at this level of play, unless someone knows exactly what to do, you're going to be able to play this and get a very comfortable game playing for the classic break in the center with pawn to e5. Now, the reason that this is actually not acceptable to play at the highest levels of chess is if you play the move knight to c6, white can play the move rook to e1 here. And after black castles, white is supposed to play the move pawn to g4, attacking the bishop. And after bishop g6, white goes e4, bishop b4, and this move bishop to g5. And as you can tell from the evaluation bar, white is actually doing very, very well. Now, again, if you know what the exact plan is, you can easily play this over the board. But if you don't know this idea and you're more of a positional player, it's very unusual to play like this. Because if we think about it from the human standpoint, the psychology of the setup, when you think about this position, it's very stable. White has played the move e3 here, intending to take the pawn, play something very slow, and suddenly you're basically provoked into being very, very aggressive with rook to e1, g4, and e4. Now, as I said, if you know it, you can play it, but if you don't, it's just very weird because g4 goes against the basic principles. Actually, it's rook e1 first, but regardless, g4 goes against the basic principles here. You don't really want to push your pawns in front of the king, and then you play the move e4, which violates another principle, which is that you play the move pawn to e3 and then pawn to e4. Now, those of you guys who have followed chess over the many years, you're probably aware of the fact that this is what is considered to be tempo. Now, by tempo, what do I mean by that? By tempo, white has taken two moves to play e3 and e4. So if we go back to right here, one of the reasons this is considered so testing is you push the pawn to e4 and build the big white center. But when you go e3 and then you go e4, you're wasting tempo or time. You've taken two turns to get the pawn to e4 versus just going there in one go. So it's not very natural to play this rook e1 and g4, but nonetheless, for the people who are IM level or GM level who are watching this video, the few of you guys that are out there and exist, the unicorns, I should say, this is actually how you punish this dubious setup by Levy Rozman. Now, Levy, of course, knows that the setup is dubious. He might not know exactly how bad it is, but he knows it's not the best setup. But again, When you take into account the psychological factors of playing someone who's more of a positional player, the fact that it's very awkward to take 2 tempi to push the pawn to e3 and then e4, playing g4, pushing a pawn in front of your king, these are things that go against the basic principles, and so it's a bit of a bluff or a semi-gamble, but it does work out because Julien plays the move bishop to e2, which is frankly a very logical human move here because you're trying to be able to move the queen away. If you were to play queen b3, which Julien will play later in the game, black can trade the bishop for the knight here, and after a move like rook to b8 followed by castles, I guess white's still fine here, but with this open king, some ideas of moving the queen here down the road by moving the knight, it looks a little bit scary with these weak pawns on the king side, very specifically these 3 pawns. So we get bishop to e2. Levy castles, and now we get queen to b3, targeting the juicer on b7, and here Levy plays the move a6. Now when Levy plays this move a6 here, he's trying to set up a very nasty tactical idea, which you will see in a lot of different opening setups where an opponent brings out a queen trying to hit a pawn on b7 or b2. There are many different varieties of this and quite a few openings, but the point is that if white takes the pawn on b7 here, after knight to a5, it's the spaghetti-o moment. Queen has no squares available. You go back here, I take, you go here, I take, you go here, I take, you go here, I take. The queen is simply trapped. You're gonna have to sack the queen for a rook, and with a queen for a rook here, black will win the game every time. So Julien plays the move rook to d1 here. Now we get queen to e7, and here we get the move bishop to d2. Now what I like about Julien Song's setup here is that he's keeping it very, very simple. He's trying to put the rooks on these 2 files, this open c file, this d file. If this d file ever opens, this rook potentially will be on a great open file. So Julien has a very simple idea of putting his rooks on these 2 files. So now we get to move b5 from Levy. This move is apparently a serious inaccuracy. When I look at the position, to me this looks like a very natural human move. Apparently if white plays move a3 in the long run after rook c1, there are going to be some problems on the queen side, but frankly as I look at this, I feel like this is one of these computer lines that as I'm looking now, I guess it's better for white, but it's something that you're not going to be able to prove in a human game in my opinion. So we get rook c1. Logical move, rook on the file. Maybe you can move the knight and then hit this knight on c6. So Levy plays knight to a5. We get knight to d5 here. Queen to c2 is perhaps also playable. Probably Julien was worried about the move bishop to g6 here. And if you go e4, there's b4 hitting the knight and the pawn. Apparently here knight to e5 and white is better. This is just pure computer nonsense as I look at it because you're just simply sacking a knight for nothing. And if black moves the knight, I guess you can take, and now you've got e5 to fork the bishop and the knight. This is just computer chess. This is complete nonsense. No human would ever play this. Probably if I were playing with white here, I'd go bishop to d3, trade the bishops, but after a move like knight c4 here with the knight guarded by the pawns, black should be completely fine. So Julien plays move knight to d5. Now we get knight takes knight. If Levy were to take the queen, white takes the queen, checking the king. And after takes, pawn takes, bishop d6 here, and then move g4, bishop g6, and knight to e5. White is actually quite a bit better because after knight to e5, let's just say black goes rook c8, white can trade and play something like rook to c6 here, followed by rook to c1. And these pawns on the queen side are all very, very big targets in the long run for the white rooks and the white bishops. So Levy takes the knight. Julien takes, and now we get to move c5. Now one thing I've said in a lot of my speedrun videos is that it's good as you're becoming a stronger and stronger player to play many different openings because these pawn structures are very, very important to understand. Now this opening has been a very slow, relatively boring queen's gambit accepted, but this pawn structure with pawns on a6 and b5 and c7 versus the rook on the c file and the bishop on a5 is something that you will very frequently see coming out of the Catalan opening. Now to go back and give you guys a little bit of brief refresher on what the Catalan is, the Catalan opening is where you put a bishop on g2, you fianchetto the bishop, black usually castles, takes on c4, and very oftentimes, actually queen c2 is the main line, you'll get positions like this with bishop d2 followed by say bishop to a5 here. And again, it's the same thing where black has these 2 pawns, and if black can ever go c5, generally black is completely fine. If black is unable to play this move c5, generally black will suffer. So now back to the game. When we look at this position, getting back to where we were here after knight d5 and bishop a5, you'll notice it's very similar. If black can get c5 and eliminate this weakness, black should be fine. Conversely, if white is able to get the rook to c6 and the rook to c1 here, white is doing very well, as we see in this line, but also the previous line that I mentioned right back here where the rook targets all these pawns. So therefore, Levy correctly plays the move pawn to c5, getting rid of the weakness. He takes with the bishop. And now at this point in the game, it's a situation where black is a little bit behind in development. White has the 2 rooks on these great files. If black can get a rook to c8 or maybe trade off a pair of bishops, black should be completely fine. So here we got the move queen to c2. This is a move that I did not like during the game, but it's an understandable decision from Julien Song. Rook to c2 is an alternative here to try and double stack on the file. Very similar to the game the other day, but probably Julien saw bishop g6, bishop d3, and thought that after takes, there's something like bishop b4 here, and black should be completely fine. So we get queen c2. Now here Levy plays the move bishop b4, and this is a move that really struck me as being kind of odd to see in this position. I thought that Levy would play the move rook a c8 because while it looks scary due to the ideas of some pins here, if white tries to play a move like b4 and you move the bishop, of course white wins here due to this queen sack for the 2 rooks. But after b4, black can play the move bishop to g6, targeting the queen. You go bishop to d3 here, and now black can sack the knight with knight takes e3, and white is simply completely lost. If you take the knight, it's a check on the king. It's the classic fossil variation. King goes, the queen gets discovered, and now black is simply up too much material with a queen for a rook and a knight. So I was really expecting Levy to play rook c8, and would have been very interesting to see what would have happened in the game if this had been played. There is a tactic that perhaps Levy saw. I suspect he just assumed that there was probably some way to take advantage of this pin, but rook takes knight, sacking the rook, and this move bishop b4 is a very creative approach. But nonetheless, after bishop takes bishop, queen takes rook here in this position, takes, queen f8, takes, and the move king takes f8. With black having the 2 bishops here, black should be okay. But Levy instead goes bishop b4, completely understandable, trying to trade off this bishop. We get the trade of the bishops. Now we get to move queen c5, and at this point already I could tell the game was definitely trending towards a draw. So we get queen c5, we get the trade. Levy trades the bishop, goes rook to d8 here, and at this point, unless white has something immediate to take advantage of these pawns on the light squares, black should be completely fine. So here we get a3, Levy plays knight d3, and now we get the move rook to c2. Levy goes knight to e5, offering the trade of the rooks here, and here Julien plays move bishop e2. Now this is a move that really took me aback a little bit here because I was expecting the move rook takes rook here, and black actually has to be quite careful. If black were to take the rook back, which was an automatic type move, after bishop b7, suddenly the pawn is under attack, and black also has problems with his back rank. If you could go rook d6 guarding the pawn, it would be fine, but there's rook c8, and spaghetti-o, you get ice skater checkmated. So you have to play the move a5. But now after rook to c5, suddenly both the knight and these pawns are suddenly all under attack, and after knight c4 and rook takes b5, white is up a pawn here, and white has very, very good chances to win the game. Therefore, after rook takes rook, black has to trade the knight for the bishop, checking the king, taking the rook here. But now after this move rook to c6, black's only move is rook to a8, and after this move rook to b6 or maybe even f4 here, it's very, very annoying to play this position. Let's say white goes rook to b6, for example. You're kind of stuck in this position. Actually, I should say maybe rook c7 is a little bit better here. I guess maybe black can still force a draw, and if you go rook b6, there's rook a7, bringing the king to the center, and probably this is a draw. But nonetheless, with this passive rook stuck guarding the 2 pawns here, it feels like if anybody's trying to do something, it should be white. So Julien goes bishop e2 instead. Levy trades the rooks, and now he plays the move rook d8. We got bishop e2, and here Levy plays move g5. Now at this point, black is completely fine because you'll notice the white bishop can no longer target the base of the chain. When we talk about pawn chains, it could be 2 pawns, it could be 3 pawns. Let me actually set up a better example. Say you got a chain of 3 pawns here. When there's a connected pawn chain in such a situation, we call this backwards pawn the base of the chain, because what happens is if white is ever able to win this pawn, suddenly the entire chain is going to collapse. All the pawns are going to fall right away if you can create the chain. Now, just to show you guys a better example so that nothing is hanging here and you don't see eval bars, if you win that chain, the base of the chain, this pawn on e6, then the other 2 pawns completely collapse along with it. So when we look at this position here, this pawn chain of a6 and b5, white cannot target the base. With the bishop on f3 here, white could target the base and start loosening these pawns on the queen side, but with the passive bishop on e2 targeting the forward facing pawn, I don't actually know the correct term for this, but the pawn that's at front of the chain of 2 here versus being able to attack the base, the pawns are completely fine. Bishop has no access to target the pawns, and at this point Levy has completely equalized. So you get the move f4. Levy trades, knight g6. We get g3 here, trying to guard the pawn on f4. And now Levy plays the move knight to e7. We get the move king to f2. And Levy goes rook to d4. Now at this point, the reason that white can never be better is that white really can't go after these pawns. If white tries something like rook to c7, let's say king f8 and rook a7, black can go rook to d2, pinning the bishop, targeting the pawn, and after takes, if anything, black is better here because the knight is jumping very, very quickly to target the bishop and this kingside pawn immediately. So Julien plays the move b4 here, a logical human move, trying to fix these pawns on the same square as the bishop so that if there is ever an endgame, the bishop will always have chances to target these pawns. And if you ever push a pawn, well, you lose a pawn and you're probably going to lose the game. So Levy plays move king g7. We get rook to c7. Levy plays knight to f5. And here we get the move bishop to h5. Now again, if white were to play the move rook to a7, trying to hit this pawn, black has a couple options. Rook to d2 is probably okay, but rook to d6 is probably the safe approach here, simply guarding the pawn, keeping an eye on this open file. And after bishop to h5, black can play a check, and black has no issues. So we get bishop to h5. Levy goes knight to d6, guarding the pawn on f7 from being captured. And now we get to move king to e2. Levy plays e5 here. This is a move that I really like because in this position, the only issue that black has here is that white can try to target this pawn on a6 or press the pawn on f7. If you can trade a few more pawns here, the rook is going to have a lot more lateral side-to-side movement. So when Levy goes e5, I really like this decision. We get takes, check, takes, and now we get the move pawn to g4. Now what Julien is doing here is he's trying to fix the bishop on h5 where it permanently spies the pawn on f7, and now the rook is free to start roaming to try and win this queenside pawn. So Levy plays check, we get king to e3, Levy goes king f6, and now we get to move pawn to h4. Levy plays h6, and here we get the move rook to c6. Now you might be wondering, why doesn't Julien Song play this move rook to a7 here, trying to win this pawn? Now, I'm not exactly sure the specific reason why rook to a7 wasn't played, but I think that perhaps Julien was worried about something like king to e5, rook takes a6, and something like f5 here. And even though white is up a pawn here, suddenly when you move the king back, it feels very scary with the king getting cut on the back rank. This king is coming in, the knight is very quick, and the computer even says this is simply equal. So we get h4. Levy goes h6. We get rook to c6 here. King to e5. We get takes. Perhaps Julien simply wanted to push his pawn up the board first. But now Levy goes f5. And with the pawn on h4 here, the game effectively dies in this position because now white can never trade the pawns, because if you trade and go back, black can simply take on h4. I guess this actually still should be a dead draw anyway, but there's no chance of winning. So Julien plays g5. We get takes, and now we got to move f4. King to e2 is played, and Levy goes knight to e4, attacking the pawn on g5. Here we got to move bishop to f3. If white were to play g6, which looks like a logical move to avoid hanging the pawn, there's knight g3, forking the king and the bishop. Black takes the bishop, the knight stops the pawn from going forward, and black is simply going to win the game. So we get bishop to f3. Levy plays rook d2, king to e1, and now Levy plays the move rook to d3, effectively forcing a trade of the bishop for the knight. If you move the bishop to h5, black takes the pawn. If you go to e2, after rook to e3, white actually is completely lost here because this threat of f3 is pretty much unstoppable to win the bishop. If you move the rook, f3 takes, king f4, you're going to lose the bishop, and you simply are going to get checkmated very, very quickly. And if you move the king to f1, there's knight g3 here. Black takes and wins. You go the other way, same problem, knight c3, and knight takes e2. Therefore, Julien trades the bishop for the knight. We get king takes bishop, g6, and now Levy forces a draw. We get a bunch of checks. We get check, 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 and the game ends peacefully. Now, if Julien were to play the move king to h2 here, this is still probably a draw, but after rook to g5 here, suddenly the king is completely cut off from ever getting back in the game here, and black's passed f-pawn is now extremely dangerous with the inability of the king to stop the pawn. Now, of course, it's still a draw, but at this point, you know there isn't really anything going on. You can't win, so why would you want to take the risk? So that's why it doesn't go king h2. And if you were to try to go this way to d2 after check and king c2 here, rook g3, again, this pawn is very quick coming up the board. The rook is escorting it. Your king can still get back, but there's no reason to take this risk because if anything happens, white is probably going to be the one that is losing. So We ended with this threefold repetition in the second classical game. Unlike the first classical game yesterday, this was much more tame, fairly dry draw between the two players, but nonetheless, there were a couple of interesting moments in this game. So at the end of the classical portion, the score is tied. I believe the draws count for 1.5 points. It was 3 points for a win, 1.5 for a draw, and 0 for a loss. So the match is tied 3-3, or effectively 1-1 if you use the regular classical scoring system. So 2 draws for Levy. I would say that when I look at the stylistic matchup of the players, this should be good for Levy, that the match is tied after the classical portion. I think Rapid is going to be very interesting to see. I think that's probably going to be very evenly matched up. I do think that in the Blitz, Levy is probably a big favorite once they get there. So in terms of the overall match situation, I think that Levy is a fairly big favorite to win this. But of course, I've been proven wrong before, and I could be proven wrong once again by this great Frenchman, Julien Song. Nonetheless, 2 classical games of chess in the book. The match is tied, some interesting moments in both games, but that is going to do it for our recap today. So I hope you guys have enjoyed my recap of the second and final classical game in this creator clash between the international masters Julien Song from France and international master Levy Rozman from the United States of America. So, hope you guys enjoyed that recap. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with another recap after the players play some very exciting rapid games tomorrow. All right, you guys, see you. Have a good one. Bye.